Hi Joe, can you hear us? Actually Joe, for this bit you can probably put your microphone on because we'd like to talk to you just a little bit about where you're up to with the course and what it is that we're going to talk about. So,
Okay,
oh hiya, hello
I'm
Joe.
on.
Hiya.
Hello.
I think because the first webinar was a spectacular flop because we had so many technical difficulties that's why we've got a low attendance today. But it's still important that we run through it and record it so that people can access it later on. We were going to talk about social capital because that's the point of the course that we're in. But we're happy to pick up any other points that you want to raise that have come up so far. So, if there is anything, the floor is yours, really.
Okay. I was really interested in the discussion about social capital. So if there's anything that we can start with on that topic, that would be great.
Okay. Well, what we'll do then is I'll run through a set of slides that are not mine. One of the issues with community development theory and any health promotion theory is that it's a borrowed science, but it's borrowed from lots of places all at the same time. So one of the issues that students often have is that the reading can get quite dense because it's pulling in political theory, social theory, health theory. It's bringing a lot of different stuff together. And even with something like social capital, there's probably about 3 or 4 core notions that have come from different traditions. And they sound sort of the same, but only sort of the same. So what I wanted to do was to go through something in a very simplistic way that anchors social capital within health promotion and community development. I was going to do these slides myself, and then I found a set of slides already on the web by Trevor Hancock, who is a foremost thinker in health promotion and is an ecologist by background and talks an awful lot about ecological approaches to health. And he's talked about social capital and where it fits along other notions like economic capital and tried to draw the difference between them. So what I'm going to do is to go through his slides with great apologies, but credit to Trevor Hancock. These are just available on the web, and a quick Google search for social capital, PowerPoint, Trevor Hancock, gets straight to these. So I'm going to run through his slides just as a way of going back in a bit of a revision session over the last few weeks, really. So is that okay from your point of view, Joe?
Yeah, that sounds fine.
Okay, right. So, the screen. So, thankfully for you, you should have lost Judith and I, and now you should have a slide that's got building community capital on it. Is that right?
Yeah, I can see a little U at the top.
Ooh.
Oh, bonus. Right. Okay, so Trevor Hancock talks about community capital and social capital. And what I'm going to do is to go through in 4 stages. First, talk generally about community capital and how do we build a community's capital overall. And that includes social capital, economic capital, and environmental capital. I'm then going to follow his path and talk about how would you make that further? How would you develop community capital further? Thinking through who the partners are and then bringing it all together in some sort of model at the end. So, first of all, community capital. Trevor Hancock, as I said, is an ecologist by background. So, he's very interested in not how we quickly invent things, but how things evolve, how things gradually grow. And his starting point is to go back to the 19th century. And he talks about a newspaper that was around at the time in the UK called The Sanitarian. In other words, health and sanitary issues. And the masthead on this newspaper was, "A nation's health is a nation's wealth." So this whole stuff about health and wealth isn't a new thing. We haven't just started to think about determinants of health and wealth as being a key, economic issues and inequalities as a recent thing. This is actually ingrained in public health going all the way back to the 19th century. So Hancock then starts to pull apart, well, okay, we talk about health and wealth. What do we mean by wealth? Most people in the street will think about wealth as coins and notes in your pocket that can buy stuff. But people who look at alternative economics suggest wealth is different forms of capital. Yes, it's financial for you to buy stuff, but it's more than that. It's a lot more than that. It does start with economic capital. And what we mean by this is the ability to buy resources, the creation of adequate wealth and healthy jobs, equitable distribution of wealth and income, and also ecological and sustainable development. So for him in his world, economic capital is an inclusive concept. Having a healthy economy for him isn't just the people at the top who've got cash, but everybody in society has the ability to have a share of the resources. So he's not seeing it as capital equals capitalism. Economic capital is an inclusive thing about the economy as a whole. But he says, when you're looking at a community, it's not just about economic capital that you need to consider around wealth. You've got to look at the natural capital that the community has access to. And as he's an ecologist, for him that means things like a high environmental quality, that, you know, around the community, the land sustains people. Now here we talk about air, water and soil. So in a rural community that would be absolutely key. But even within an urban environment, things like the transport system, the buildings, shelter, those sorts of resources, they're also in his system. So it's all about healthy ecosystems, sustainable resources, and things like habitat and wildlife conservation. So dead easy to see from a rural environment. Just test us a little bit in terms of thinking, how does the urban environment fit into that as well? So in terms of natural capitalism, what we do around all of that? Well, it's about the use of natural resources, not just using nature's resources that are depleting, but actually, you know, putting some of that back. Shift to biologically inspired production models, so that, you know, everything's much more sustainable. In terms of business models, actually look at services and solutions-based business models, rather than the sort of rape and pillage business models that, you know, as long as you make a fast buck and then move on to another community, that's fine. In this way of thinking, it's not fine. It's about having sustainability inbuilt. Which brings us to social capital. So what's that then in relation to, you know, having financial resources, having natural resources? What's social capital? Now, as I say in the introduction, social capital as a concept has developed from 2 or 3 different routes, from different ways of thinking. There's at least 3 routes in all of this. The one common thing is social capital is conceptualised as the glue that holds communities together. So we talk about high social cohesion and civicness. So there's, you know, in a community, you can actually feel that the community is together in some way, or there are communities living side by side, peacefully, interacting safely, and there's a vibe, there's a feel to the whole place.
A sense of belonging. A
sense of belonging. Not many people feeling as outsiders. It's inclusive. And what sort of helps all of that through is having safe and livable built environments that sustain all of that. So examples have been parks where people can, you know, feel the air and wander about and meet each other. That some of the amenities and some of the sort of parts of civic life are equally open to all. Things like having post offices where people meet and have a chat whilst they're going about and doing the daily living stuff. Do you want to come in, Judith? No? And underneath all of that, this is equitable access to all those basic determinants of health. Absolutely fundamental in social capital is it has to be inclusive. Everybody in the community needs to be able to access all these resources. So that's social capital as the glue. As I said, there's 3 aspects: social cohesion and civicness. To keep that going, a level of public investment in some of the soft social infrastructure, so that there are health services within this community, there are education systems, there are social systems, There's a safety net that's provided publicly and open to all. And at the same time as having a safety net to support society, there's also a much more harder edge social net, which is around, there's a judicial and political system, there's a policing force that keeps people safe as well. So it's not just the soft health and social care services, it's also that form of justice that's around it as well. So social capital isn't just one thing, it is the glue about a community, but there's many different elements within it. So you put all of that together, and there's still then a fourth form of capital that Trevor Hancock believes can only be created if you've got elements of that environmental capital, economic capital, and social capital all working together. They should overlap in how that affects on the individual, on the human, and developing human capital. And he would point out that this is the end point, really, from our point of view as people that promote health. This is the grand aim, to have people that are educated, innovative, creative, that are participating in community, and bottom line, healthy people. Now, that all sounds a bit waffly from a health point of view for a lot of observers, particularly from the biomedical model. But this comes back to people like Catherine Mansfield's view of what health is all about. You know, to be healthy, I need to be all that I can be. You know, that I can live a breathing adult life in contact with the things and people that mean something to me. You know, the ultimate point of health is being happy, contented, sustainable, and relevant to people around you.
And it's a resource, isn't it?
And it's a resource.
The WHO says it's a resource for everyday living.
Yeah, so health isn't just avoiding the disease, it's actually, it's a higher goal than all of that. And if you've got health, it's a driving force for anything else that you do. So all a bit esoteric, but actually there's some real good traditions in all of that. You know, you've got different worlds coming together. And what he then goes on to say is all of this comes together in what he's called the mandala of health. Now, in other parts of the Public Health Masters course, we talk about the mandala of health. I think we talk about it in health promotion theory. But it's essentially a way of conceptualising all those forms of capital together and looking at the overlaps between them. So you've got community, which here is social capital. You've got environment, which is that natural capital. Economic capital is the economy. And if we're actually to promote health, what he's talking about is that we're aiming for the things in the overlaps, that we've got livable communities, sustainable communities, and communities that are equitable. And when you've got all of that going on in the centre, it creates health. So that's basically where social capital fits within how do we promote a healthier community. Just to underline that all that sounds a bit soft and woolly, a bit left field, but even the World Bank, as far back as 1995, recognised that when you look at global wealth, only 20% of wealth is produced by economic wealth. 20% is natural capital, but 60% of global wealth is a combination of social and human capital. Now that's quite interesting because that comes from hard-nosed bankers in the World Bank.
And that trend was picked up by the Stiglitz Commission, which I think was in 2010, which is the kind of up-to-date version of those same ideas.
Yeah.
And that actually, if you want to have a economically productive workforce and population, then you need to invest in their health.
Yep. So, on to what do we do about all this? Because public health isn't just looking at all this and going, "Ooh, isn't that interesting?" It's actually creating it. How do we create health by dealing with these issues? How do we look at social capital and develop that? How do we develop it alongside the other forms of capital? So, what is development? Theoretically, it's a gradual unfolding or growth. It's about changing something that is there now and making it better, making the better aspects grow, and things that limit us, diminishing those. What Hancock points out is that the four forms of capital, the four forms of wealth, require 4 different forms of development if health is to be maximised. So economic development is making sure that basic determinants of health are adequately met for all. Trying to eliminate material deprivation, which would enable us all to buy into health. Social development is the development of the communities and societies of people to ensure everyone's got an equal opportunity of benefiting from development. It's not just about the financial resources that need to be equitable, it's opportunity to learn, it's opportunity to be involved, to volunteer, to have a job. All of that. I mean, if you go back to things like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it isn't just about getting shelter. It's about moving on and being a person and being recognised for your own human resources. So social development is about giving everybody the opportunity to be learning and growing.
I think that also picks up on Professor Marmot's work on social determinants and the idea of the social gradient, that relative material and psychosocial deprivation, and about what we do in terms of where we put resources. Actually, it's not just about everybody having access in exactly the same way, because some communities actually need facilitating to get access, and that's what he calls proportionate universalism. That goes along with the idea of the social gradient. I think that fits in quite well with that.
Absolutely. Going to the environmental side, sustainable development isn't just, stop all progress now and let's go back and live in caves, which sometimes is portrayed in the media. Sustainable development is development in a way that can be repeated year on year and into the future and into future generations. So it's indefinitely environmentally sustainable. So future generations continue to survive and thrive, but at the same time, still providing economic, social and human development today. And then human development, very close to what we've already talked about in terms of social development, but really down at the individual level, providing tailored access and support to people that every human has the chance to get their fullest potential realised. So, bringing all that together, real capitalism isn't just, as I've already hinted at, just building up large banks of resources and then deciding who gets a bit of the share about it. It's about forming all of those forms of capital together. It can't be any one of them having more importance than the others. So, a bit of a manifesto. New capitalism for the 21st century should be a combination of ecological capital, social capital, economic capital and human capital. And all of that's enshrined within health promotion theory and public health theory. Lots of the statements from the WHO, the Ottawa Charter, this is where it all comes together. The social capital is a key part of all of that. It obviously demands that if we are to do any of this work in terms of development, it's got to be through a partnership. And brings us back to determinants of health work and Ottawa Charter. How is health producing all of this? It's through a combination of all of those forms of capital. But being specific, it's about peace, shelter, income, sustainable resources, food, education, ecosystem, equity. What Hancock then goes on to is to give us some specific hints about then who partners should be, because whilst in theory we could be working with everybody that has an impact on the human condition, I think he's quite careful in saying actually not everybody's got that high goal in mind, and there are some health damaging organisations who would be really very, very keen to get involved with us with developing human capital and social capital, but actually who we should avoid. So who produces health? Those who build peaceful relations locally and globally, grow food, build homes and communities, educate kids, create good jobs. In other words, civic and civil society. Specific partners for health of public sector, NGOs, faith organisations, but the private sector, labour unions, etc. Within the private sector, who then should we be going out to engage with in building social capital and the other forms of capital? Well, for Hancock, the bottom line is that only those that share our own bottom line of health improvement, then we share a common interest. And his caveats are that there's a lot of partners out there who are not interested in that, who make money from illness. And he specifically mentions the obvious one, the tobacco industry, but you could throw in the alcohol, you could throw in the certain parts of the food industry. What's really important for us in a public health course is what he calls the medical industrial complex, and includes in that some of the big drug companies as well. Who makes money from illness and profit in ways that harm health? And it's tricky when you look at the drug industry because, you know, it's on one hand absolutely essential to improving health, and other parts of it actually not. It creates a reliance upon drugs for people who maybe could find a different way. So maybe that's another input on another day. But for him, private sectors, partners for health, are those whose bottom line improves when the public health improves. And specifically, health and life insurance companies, tourism, recreation industries. Judith and I did a fair bit of work a couple of years ago in Slovenia looking at ecotourism, which was about developing environmentally sustainable ways of changing the food supply that also improved health, which was interesting. Sports and fitness industries, and bottom line is all businesses, because of the great toll of health at work, should have an interest in health. The real people that we desperately need to get health onto the agenda, though, if we use this capital approach and building the social capital approach, are food producers, home builders, teachers, provision of clean water. I mean, certainly we take an international perspective, a huge issue, and creators of healthy employment, which enables people to express themselves within the work that they do, not just become parts of a machine. And anybody that's already out there in any one of these four forms of capital. Now, he then gets down into something much more interesting for us in terms of community development. Who are those people in projects that are doing work that hit on all forms of capital altogether? People who develop community gardens, allotments, ideal types of community projects. Community-based energy retrofits, people who work with ways of making ecologically more sound buildings, public transport, cycleways, green pathways, etc., etc. So I just want to end up with a few slides. We're giving examples of how do we build community capital, what sorts of projects then would fall out from all of this in terms of social capital and human capital. Community gardens, I've already flagged up. They're about working together, learning about food from other cultures, bringing a whole generation into discussions about food production, you know, passing on from generation to generation knowledge of past ways of growing, cooking, eating food. Massive issue in the UK at the moment, but I actually think through most countries, the food industry is stripping away our understanding of the history of food and where food comes from within our own local communities. Ecological capital, creation of green spaces, organic production of food.
Low food miles.
Low food meals, absolutely. And linked to all of this in terms of economic capital and community gardens, things like food banks, reducing the cost of food. There's a big growth at the moment in selling ugly food, because lots of supermarkets won't have anything that doesn't look like the perfect apple. So where do they go? Often they go to animal feed, and how do we get them back into the human chain so that people can buy cheaper food that just doesn't look perfect? And within all of that, creating very local employment. And in terms of community gardens, that also gives an opportunity for people to be active, learn about food and nature, and eat better. Energy retrofits in housing, the social capital of it is that people work together. use not just the physical strength working together, but actually get minds together in a local planning group. The ecological capital is increased by energy saving, reducing greenhouse gases and the pollutants. Economic capital is increased by local employment, giving people in a local community disposable income, and the human capital improving health via better housing quality and getting skills and knowledge. And public transport, same again. What's the social capital aspect of that? Well, public transport is a great democratiser. When you're all on a train together, it strips out looking at your porch next to your bicycle on the road, etc. And it increases access for people who don't have the economic capital to be able to buy into a car. It spreads the cost of transport between lots of different types of people. There's benefits in terms of ecological capital, in terms of reduced energy, reducing greenhouse gases. Economic capital, because of that shared cost, reduces the cost of living for all, increased disposable income. Then the human capital impact of all of that, reduced disease due to air pollution, safer modes of transport, and a more active way of commuting. So I've raced through all of those, but trying to show where social capital fits alongside other notions that are already very familiar to us within community development. And hopefully that's a much more simple view than lots of the things that you've been reading about. Hancock signs off all of this by saying it takes a whole community to raise healthy people. So that was the point of us putting social capital as a concept within the course materials. How is it that we work with communities to reconnect the way that actually communities probably did used to work anyway, when we lived closer to our local environment? And as an ecologist, that's exactly why he signs off that way. Okay, so that's social capital. I'll reduce the slides and come back onto video. Yeah, we can work this technology. Okay, Joe, you still with us?
Yep, I am, yep.
Great. Stuart, is anybody else joining us during?
No.
No. So I suppose you're our only test for this, Joe. Did that make any sort of sense? Did it add anything to the course materials?
Yeah, it made absolute sense to me actually, and I really like how it was all put together. It was what I felt social capital was and how it fitted in. It seemed to flow really nicely as to what my thinking was, and putting it into that diagram, it makes a lot of sense to me. So yeah, I really like that. That was good.
Good. What we'll do is we'll make sure that it's available to everybody else to see in the discussion board, and we'll encourage people just to run the video for themselves. But I'll put the slide set up there as well. As I say, I started off trying to construct that for myself, and then I found that slide set and thought, what's the point? He's done it. And that represents work that Trevor Hancock's been working on for probably about 25, 30 years. It's quite a long time ago since he put the mandala of health together, but it's a really strong model, and it's a good way of organising what's a lot of theoretical perspectives, really. Is there anything else from the course materials so far, Joel, that you'd like us to cover off, or anything that you'd like to challenge, or are you finding it okay so far?
Yeah, I'm finding it okay. I'm finding it sort of really stimulating alongside my experiences of work and sort of how the two things mesh together. I think I'm just writing a couple of notes as you were going along. One of the things I thought about was, because we've started to do things like community gardeners, or it's called Master Gardener, the project that we've brought into Lincolnshire. And it's working really well, but it's on sort of a tiny scale, I suppose. It's one of those things that in particularly deprived communities is very difficult to do. There's no sense of community. People are very insular in how they operate, and I think lots of the things I've been reading kind of back that up, that people have gone from wanting to chat to their neighbours to wanting to look after themselves and not wanting to trust anybody. So things like that, for me, they absolutely work, and I can see now why they work, and all those different 4 things that make up the wealth that you were talking about. But I just find practically they're so difficult to do when it comes to working with people.
Yeah.
It's so difficult to achieve and to get such small gains with small numbers of people. It takes a long time.
Absolutely, and I think it's really. I was doing some work yesterday with a mental health trust in Greater Manchester, and I was working with a whole range of different service providers within that trust, from physiotherapists to stroke nurses to district nurses to school nurses. And we talked about some of these concepts. And what was really difficult was that they thought they had to go out and stimulate this sort of project. They had to go out and, evangelise and get people to get involved in this. And the problem is that's never going to take off. You can't artificially take in a concept like this. It has to be responding to what's already there. And it's difficult within a community that maybe they've tried some of these things or wanted some of these things in the past, and the resources have not been there from, say, the council to support people growing things for themselves. So it's a hard slog. It's a hard slog trying to turn that around and making sure that it's not our very worthy health, what's the word? Our health goals that we are trying to put onto a community, but actually trying to work with where they might want to go anyway and just ease them forward.
And having an asset-based approach, so you're looking at what's already there,
yeah,
and building on it rather than trying to impose, something.
Yeah.
And it's very close to my heart because I was in a really fortunate position June last year that in the village that I live in, which is in a rural area, the council suddenly said, there's some allotments here. Do you want to have an allotment? Oh, hello?
Yep, still there.
Oh, sorry, our screen turned off. Do you want to have an allotment? Now, had I still been living in Manchester, that would never happen. I'd have to wait 10 years to get an allotment and have my name down on the list. But because it's in a farming area, most people have got access to farms anyway. But what I've learned through just doing stuff on the allotment is a whole series of things that I just never knew about before. Even things like weather forecasting for the next 2 or 3 days. And it's only because the people on the other allotments are all ex-sailors. They're all fishermen and sailors. And they know all this stuff that I never thought I'd learned from being on allotments. But they'll say, oh yeah, also tomorrow, the weather's coming in from the southwest tomorrow, so it means this. And therefore, just hold off your planting for another couple of days. Bizarre stuff that you learn. Now, none of that you can bring from the outside. It really has to be organic from the people themselves. So I take my hat off to anybody is trying to do this work. It is long, slow work. But the point I'm trying to get to is that when it takes off, boy, does it take off. And it really shoots through there. As I said, I've been doing this work in this trust in the last couple of days that I last worked with 5 years ago. And at the time, Groundwork in the area, who are an environmental charity, had started to work with health because they'd found that they got a number of people that were volunteering for Groundwork who hadn't got, they lived in flats, they don't have a garden, and really wanted to garden, but they didn't have anywhere to garden. They just wanted to be able to tend plants and things. And they approached in the NHS to say, is there any groups of people that have got a garden and just can't cope anymore? So either because they've got physical disabilities or mental health issues or whatever. And all we did was do a bit of brokering, a bit like speed dating. These people that didn't have gardens and wanted to garden, and these people that had got them, and it gave them stress because they couldn't garden anymore and they were getting all overgrown. So that was 5 years ago, and it was a very small project. And I went back, as I say, yesterday and the day before, and everyone's talking about this wonderful movement in the area, and it's grown and grown and grown. It's throughout the whole borough now, from which started as a really neat little idea. So it can take off, but it takes a bit of holding your nerve and just keeping dripping it forward. Sorry, long answer to a very quick question from you. So, are you okay with all of that then? Everything's gone so far, and you've got your midterm assignments in, and
yeah, got it in. Fingers crossed.
She'll be fine. She'll be fine. We'll probably call it a day then for this session. Yeah. If you're okay. Thank you for your feedback. Thank you for sticking with it. We did have Latifat right at the beginning, then
I thought we did, yeah.
Yeah, and then disappeared. So hopefully it's just a problem at our end, and she's seen all of this. But because we recorded it, we'll put it online and other people will be able to see it after the event.
Okay, thank you very